always feel some sadness when we do the transition from just singing back to talking words. And I saw a couple of days ago in a book called Ketem Paz, which is a reflection of sort of the earliest Chassidut in Eretz Yisrael, end of the 18th century, a teaching on the verse from Shir HaShirim. Is that better? Thank you. A teaching from the verse on Shir HaShirim, Achot lanu ketana v'shadayim en la ma na'aseh la'achotenu bayom sheyidubar ba. Right? We have a little sister. What will we do when it's time to marry her? But the drasha focuses on the last part of the verse, Ma na'aseh la'achotenu bayom sheyidubar ba. What will we do, says the Hasidic master, with the love we feel, with the dveikut, the sister, the closeness, with that experience of being that close to God, biyom sheyidubar ba, when we start talking about it? All gets lost. Ma na'aseh la'achotenu biyom sheyidubar ba. So, let's talk about it. My name is Ebn Leader. Mostly I'm here today to talk, I think, in my function as teaching in the pluralistic Rabbinical School of Hebrew College in Boston. I've been teaching in rabbinic cohorts of IJS for about a decade or so now, and I'm also a participant in this prayer as practice project of IJS. The other one more thing I want to say before I start is just how tremendously uplifting it is to be just in a room with so many people who care so much about Tefillah that they've left everything for a day, traveled to come and talk about it, and with hopes of getting something useful out of it, and that's so rare and so wonderful, and it really feels like such a privilege and an honor to be part of that. So, what I'm hoping to do in my 15 minutes is to try to enrich the discussion that we can have here, and that mostly sort of many people who are working in communities as rabbis, as cantors, as educators can have. The way we can enrich this conversation by bringing some of the things we've learned from working on this in the Rabbinical School where I teach. Now, the Rabbinical School is not a congregation or a Hillel or any of those sorts. It functions more, I would say, like a laboratory. It is a place where all sorts of experiments and all sorts of attempts can be made, and I am hoping if I share some of our reflections from there, why there isn't a one-to-one application, but it may be that some of what we have seen, some of what we're working with, can help inspire ideas or thoughts or directions that other people can work with. The school per se, the Rabbinical School of Hebrew College in Boston, has two advantages as a laboratory for this particular issue of Tefillah as practice. One is it's a pluralistic school. And what that means is it is not committed a priori to a particular form. That is, it doesn't assume ahead of time that Tefillah for a particular student takes a particular form. So what it means is there's a wide breadth of possibilities of experimenting with forms that is not always available in every other context. And I'll talk a little more later about form and the difference between form and goal and how that plays out. That's one advantage. The other advantage, again, as a laboratory, is that from the beginning of the school, about 10 years ago, Tefillah has been very high on our priorities and sort of our understanding of what a rabbi needs to do and needs to work with. And we have continued doing and failing and trying and learning and all over the time. And it's something that our students engage with and our faculty engages with on a daily basis, one level or the other, whether it's in practice, it's in conversation, it's in trying something. So it's a central part of our school life and our understanding of who we are and what we're doing. And within that, it's happening in a pluralistic context, which means all sorts of forms are possible. I want to also echo what Nancy said earlier today, which is that my current understanding of Tefillah as practice, what that really means, or what the key element of Tefillah as practice is two things. For Tefillah to be a practice, and for that matter I would say for any spiritual thing to be a practice, it has to have a goal. That is, I have to know what ultimately, it can be a short-term goal, it can be a long-term goal, it can be in 80 years from now, it can be tomorrow or this afternoon. But if I don't know what it is that I'm doing, then what am I practicing? Right? There are all sorts of things I do every day in my life. They're not a practice. Not everything that I do repeatedly or not repeatedly is per se a practice. Calling something a practice means it has an orientation, means it's going towards something. And that leads to the number 2, which is there has to be a connection between the particular methodologies or things I do, or I know David afterwards will not talk about not liking the use of the word techniques or technologies. I'm sorry.
I like it.
Liking the word technologies, right? There has to be some connection between the things I do and the goal that I'm trying to achieve. Right? That is, if my goal is I'm trying to achieve a community in which everybody loves each other and which everybody helps each other, then I have to ask myself, okay, if that's the goal of my tefillah, are the particular things that I'm doing in tefillah serving that? Are they going counter to that? Or if my goal is I want everybody to have an experience of a face-to-face conversation with God, that's great. It's a wonderful goal. Is what I am doing actually serving that goal? And what are the ways in which it serves that goal? So I really think the essence of any practice is asking the question, what is my goal? And how are the methodologies that I apply serving that goal? If I have that straight in my mind, then I can evaluate, then I can think about change, then I can do all sorts of things with the practice that if I don't have those two straight, I can't do. Now, what I want to talk about today is very, very specific, is I want to share some of what we have learned just from putting that question of goal in the center of the conversation. Right? There are all sorts of things about how different goals develop in different ways and different techniques develop in different ways. But what I want to talk about today is just the ways in which asking the question, what is the goal for your tefillah, can potentially change the dynamics of what is actually happening, no matter what your answers to that question are. And this is a experiment that we started about a year and a half ago at the school. We're now in the middle of the 3rd semester of this experiment, in which there's a whole series of things that students do and participate in as part of their tefillah requirement, so to speak, of the school. But we did one thing starting a year and a half ago, in which one part of the student requirement was to be part of a tefillah group that practiced together once a week and discussed and reflected on its practice once a week. Now, the catch in this thing was that the groups had to be created around a common goal. Okay, so there we were at the beginning of September, right? And we said, okay, everybody has to be part of a group that shares a goal for tefillah. And then once you have the group, we'll see, like, what do you actually do? How do you reflect on it? How do you move through it? Lesson number one. Lesson number one. That language is very difficult for American Jews. I mean, in the role of rabbi as stating the self-evident and the obvious, you need to take a process. Because besides the whole layers of emotional baggage and things that has to be dealt with when you start asking that question, it's out of our vocabulary. If you ask somebody, okay, what do you guys do in Tefillah in your synagogue, right? We, generally speaking, will get a whole list of form answers. We sing a lot. We're very participatory. We use Sim Shalom. We use the new Mishkan Tefillah. Right? We sit in a circle rather than in pews. We have a mechitza. Those are all form questions. Not a single one of those is a goal question. There is, and that was our first lesson last September, not the one that just went by, but the one before, was it's actually a process. It's a really significant process of getting people to begin to articulate precisely what a goal for tefillah is, number one, and then to take the next step and then ask, okay, what is my goal for tefillah? So we came up ultimately with quite a few groups around different goals, and I will give a few examples, and my apologies to the students or graduates of Hebrew College that are sitting here if I do not mention the particular group you participated in, but I will not have them all, and I promise I have another list coming up later. So there was one group whose goal, inspired by liberation theology, was to lead to more liberation of oppressed minorities in the world, and that's what Tefillah was about. There was another group whose goal was, through ecstatic prayer, to experience a catharsis, and that catharsis, through that catharsis, changed the way they walked through life. There was another group whose goal was improvement of personal qualities, of midot, right, of their arrogance, of patience, of whatever their midot were. Like, the goal of tefillah was to come out a better person of those midot. There was a group whose goal was to struggle with having a personal relationship with God, like atah, right, to be able to address God as atah. I'm stopping short of saying achieving a personal relationship with God, but of struggling with that, putting that one-to-one relationship with God as a goal for their tefillah, and many more. And then there was another category of groups. I'm talking now over 3 semesters. We're in the middle of a 3 semester. There was another category of groups that come much closer, and again, I'll talk about this a little more further. There was another group that came closer to talking about forms than about goals. It is the group who wants to practice saying the same word and the same tunes every day for a year. See what that does to the spiritual practice. The group that wants to practice spontaneous prayer. Get together and see what happens. The group that wanted to understand what the goal of tefillah is by slowing it down so much that it took a whole semester to go through Shachrit once from beginning to end. And they did a little piece every week, and it took them a whole semester to go through it. I want to share some observations from this, where we are now in this 3rd semester of this experiment. The first most striking observation, and so if the title of this thing was moving from attending service to prayer as practice, the most striking observation is that having a goal transfers ownership in an immediate way. That is, if I know what it is I'm trying to do, and I walk into services knowing what I'm trying to do, then I'm going to say, oh, today's service helped me with what I was trying to do, or today's service didn't help me with what I was trying to do. That's a very different set of mind than walking into the service and saying, well, let's see what the rabbi is going to do today. Or let's see what the cantor is going to do today, or what you're going to give to me. Or maybe even more common, okay, let's just sit and this will be over in about an hour and we will go to Kiddush. Right? Right? And neither of those options have any sense of ownership. Now, again, in our experiments, there are two things that supported the sense of ownership, and I think it's very important to recognize that. One is, I think, just the clarity and definition of a goal itself. Just having a goal facilitates that sense of ownership. And the other thing was, it was a bottom-up process, which is, I think it could work the other way as well, but particularly in our experiment, it was the groups that articulated the goal for themselves and then went to apply it, thus further enhancing that sense of ownership. One could experiment the other way as well, that is, with just articulating this is going to be the goal, now people come and join it. I think you would also get a much stronger sense of ownership than not articulating. But in this particular case, you had both of those things working together, both the investment and the articulation by self of the goal, and just the fact that the goal was actually there to be worked with. That's one. Number two is, having a clearly articulated goal neutralized, I think, two of the dominant elements, or two elements that show up a lot in Tefillah otherwise, and those are the issues of nostalgia and obedience. Neither one of those, right, actually works very well with really articulating a goal, right? You know, it's also part of the way we thought about goals. I'm the parent of a 4.5-year-old, so I am extremely well trained at knowing that whatever you say, the next question is always, why? Right? And then you answer that, and then the next question is, why? So I think that process of keeping asking, so what do you want to get out of this? That's fine. Yes, your grandfather did it, your grandmother did it. And why are you doing it? What is it that you hope to get out of it? Shifted a conversation in a different way. And the issue of obedience, right? I do this because I have to do it, or I do this because I'm going to be letting down the whole of the Jewish people and God if I don't show up to do this. Transferred into something, I think, much more characteristic of practice, which is discipline. That is, there's a difference between saying, oh, I have to do this, and between saying, oh, I'm trying to achieve a certain goal, and if I skip today, I'm going to fall behind on my ability to achieve that goal. Again, that depends totally on our number two, which is there's a connection between what it is, the things that you're doing and the goals you're trying to achieve. But so instead of the language of obedience, or the language of this is what we have to do for one or other, we have, by putting goal at the center, I think we have helped facilitate a new kind of discourse, which is all about what I'm calling now discipline instead of obedience. Number three, and the last one for these, number three is, I think articulating a goal has been extremely helpful in clarifying what is sometimes a mix-up between what happens in the tefillah and what happens outside of the synagogue, or outside of the tefillah, or outside of whatever practice it is, which is, right, that question of, well, you know, how is this connected to anything else I'm doing in my life? Once you articulate a goal, it's very clear. Either you should be looking for things in the tefillah experience, or you should be looking for them elsewhere. If my goal for tefillah is to change my midot, to change who I am as a person, the way I interact in the world, then my measure for was the tefillah successful is not something that happens in the tefillah itself. My measure becomes then, how did I behave when I was standing in line for the bus and somebody cut in the line? That now becomes the measure of my tefillah. That kind of goal, of course, by the way, once you have a practice goal of that sort, it actually facilitates thinking about long-term goals rather than short-term goals. Because I know very few goals, very few serious goals that are achieved overnight. Right? And I've been talking mostly about personal goals, which I think is actually an important conversation and discussion, and I would actually tend to put emphasis on those. But there are also community goals as well. Is what are the goals as a community that we're trying to do when we put together our tefillah? On the other hand, if my experience is to have a mystical experience of God, of course the 4.5-year-old in me is going to ask, why do you want to have an experience of God? But let's assume just for a moment that that's the goal, right? Then I know it's about what we have achieved in this service, or if I'm a more sophisticated thinker, then I'd say, how much closer have I got to that by today's practice than I was before today's practice, and so on. But so it brings a big clarity to that nagging question of what is the relationship between what we're doing in the synagogue as a group and what we're doing outside. The main challenge, and this is the last thing I'm saying, one of the main challenges that rose from this was how dominant discourse of form is in the American Jewish community. And I want to say something good about form, about the conversation about form. The conversation about form, what it serves is an ability for real pluralism in what people are doing once they come to the synagogue. Right? I think that's probably why we mostly talk about it, which is to say, I don't want to get into your mind. I don't want to tell you what it's about. I am going to, this is what we do, right? And you come and do whatever you want with it. Right? And that is, without question, I think, a positive element of talking about form. I think it has two real significant drawbacks. One is the tendency to become an empty form. That is, because all we're if really everybody had goals in their mind and we had a shared form, that would be one thing. The reality usually is the only thing we're talking about is form. Nobody comes with an articulated goal. All we have is an empty shell. That's danger number one of the discourse about forms. And the other one is, in general, I have just not found really that it is as productive in terms of engagement, in terms of practice, or all the other things that we have talked about before, that putting goal in the center of the conversation puts. So I've overshot by about 6 minutes, but I am really open and glad to continue this conversation. Again, with the caveat and the reminder that what we're doing is a laboratory, and it's happening in laboratory conditions, and it is aleinu hamelacha to ask, what are the useful pieces from that can actually be taken? What are the useful insights from that can be taken into congregations, into schools, etc.? Thank you.